Welcome to Asia Global Online. I'm Alejandro Reyes, Director of Knowledge Dissemination at the Asia Global Institute, and I manage Asia Global Online, the digital journal of the Asia Global Institute. Currently featured on Asia Global Online is an article by Yoshikazu Kato, Adjunct Associate Professor at the Institute. Yoshi describes how the COVID-19 pandemic has generated significant stress and distrust between China and other countries, particularly the United States. While tensions between the two powers are not new, Yoshi suggests that they have been further exacerbated by the emergence, even before the coronavirus crisis, of a more assertive China on the global stage and Xi Jinping's pursuit of his doctrine of major power diplomacy. So Yoshi, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm wondering if you could give us some background on this concept of major power diplomacy.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Thank you for having me. Major power diplomacy, this is a product of Xi Jinping's New Year, in my understanding. And previously, back to like Jiang Zemin or Hu Jintao's term, defined after Beijing Olympics. At that time, China's major power diplomacy means China's diplomacy with major powers, like the United States, Russia, maybe sometimes in Japan. But now, the Chinese Communist Party is very drastically shifting or reoriented the concept. So now for Xi Jinping, major power diplomacy, this means diplomacy adds a major power. So China is more proactively seeking its interest or rights globally. So this is a very important concept and reorientation of China's national strategy. So, but the problem is, how we, the rest of the world, adjust or respond to this new concept or new phenomena, because this has sometimes created some, problems, tensions, or stress. So, this is a new challenge for us, particularly in the context of COVID-19.
Well, in fact, let's go down that path, because you, in your article, you describe very well what China is trying to do in terms of taking advantage, if you will, of the coronavirus crisis to pursue the major power diplomacy track. But how do you think other countries will respond? We already see the United States kind of stepping up the competition with China and the rhetoric about, China not behaving well in terms of its transparency, in terms of letting the world know about the alleging that China didn't inform the world about the pandemic, about the epidemic, about the virus soon enough. How do you think other countries will respond? And I guess we have to think about, the response in the United States versus the response in Europe, and then of course the response in countries around this part of the world, in Southeast Asia, Japan, and then indeed maybe in other developing countries. The responses will be very different. So I'm wondering if you give us your thoughts on the responses, how countries will respond.
Sure. Actually, you very rightly described what's a major power diplomacy or response from the international society. Actually, it depends, because this has different implications for different countries, different areas. Because my major power diplomacy, and my understanding is this has four aspects, right? It's the economic expansion, the political penetration, and friendship creation and protection of core interests. But back to the more fundamental question: how should we deal with China? What does the rise of China mean for us? But who is us, right? For example, Japan, the United States, Russia, North Korea, or in developing countries or developed economies, actually we would have different response, different implication for that. So I would say the response from the international community has been very divided, far from integration. So like looking at the United States, actually US, maybe it's a very specific response from the Trump administration, but very much, strong, very confrontational. But, looking at some countries, even Japan, basically, no response. including now what's happening in Hong Kong. Of course, like US and Canada, or in Australia, UK, they have already responded. We are deeply concerned on what's happening on Hong Kong. I mean, the new security law. Maybe it would create new tensions, and then maybe they think China is taking advantage of the this vacuum created by the pandemic. Now China is moving forward. But maybe this is somehow explanation from the United States. But Japan, Japan has different understanding, or so far Japan has not responded or not condemned the China's this action or enacting the new security law. So I would say different countries, even in liberal democracies and U.S. alliances, we would have different responses to what the China trying to do. And so that's why it's very important for us to understand the China's real intention, what they want to do. So in this sense, I would say for the Chinese Communist Party, the most important thing is protecting its legitimacy. Legitimacy through economic, political, diplomatic ways to consistently maintain and protect its legitimacy. Otherwise, China collapse theory, this kind of very important question would be coming up with. So this is how I understand your question. How should we or do we respond to the China's major power diplomacy? But this is very divided, far from integration. So it's a great challenge for us how to deal with China and to understand continuously what is China's real intention, what do they really want to do. So this is my
and now, would you be concerned as we move towards November in the U.S. elections? There are those saying that the big issue will be China. That will be a determining issue. I mean, of course, the U.S. performance response to the coronavirus, but China will be a factor for sure. Do you see relations then between the U.S. and China kind of further deteriorating as we get towards November? Could it become even more heated? I mean, and possibly we really could step into a kind of Cold War scenario, if you will.
I am not optimistic. I mean, beyond that, the U.S. presidential campaign. I think, of course, now nobody knows the outcome, right? Trump or Biden, but, it seems to be, very confrontational, maybe different approach, different tactics, but, it's now anti-China or maybe I would say anti-Xi Jinping's major power diplomacy looks very bipartisan. This is a kind of consensus in U.S. Congress, U.S. government. So maybe this seems to be only consensus on U.S. foreign policies, even I would say. So I think that now the United States and China, they are very aware that now this is a strategic competitor, and this would not be end in very short time. So now China, I think China is ready. What China is preparing for how to tackle this U.S. approach, very strong. And actually, we say engagement policy. China, I think China now already concluded. Now the United States has abandoned the engagement policy with China. But of course, they are very carefully managed to use some containment or confrontation. But this is exactly the strategic competition. So now China is trying to do that. So I think, for example, Hong Kong's issue or Taiwan, this means core interest for China. I think China would be no fundamental compromise, zero tolerance to protect its core interests, because this is a very important part of the major power diplomacy.
So let's in fact talk a bit about China, because the economy has reopened. We have the 2 meetings, the Lianghui underway. What can you say? What are your thoughts on post-COVID China, as it were? I mean, in terms of what's the direction at the moment? Is it really focused on very much on economic recovery, and that they're more the interests abroad, say the international issues will be driven more by the need to address the domestic challenges, particularly the economic ones?
Sure. I wouldn't say China puts a great focus or emphasis on post-COVID-19. Because now, the Xi Jinping's administration already mentioned a new normal or a new era So, I wouldn't say, China combines the COVID-19 with something new. Rather, they are going back to a new normal, and a new normal has already existed. But as we know, China, this year in the annual conference, the Li Keqiang disclosed a working report, and China omitted, the GDP growth target. This means China thinks now the circumstance is very much uncertain, particularly outside the border. You can look at the United States, Europe, the influence of a pandemic couldn't be estimated or predicted very well. So that's why China omitted the GDP growth. And as we know, the economy is the most important part for protecting legitimacy. And this has always mattered for China. So I think now China, as you mentioned, if we say the COVID-19 period, China, first of all, trying to maintain and boosting economy, using every possible tools like, fiscal policy, financial policy, or government-initiated investment on infrastructure, and of course, some more strategic area like 5G, intelligence, AI, or the internet, or even some surveillance issue. I think China is trying to move on in this issue. Maintaining the legitimacy is very important. That's why economy does matter. But the problem is, how to tackle, how to respond to the pandemic. In this sense, China seems very uncertain, not that confident on do that.
Well, I think that's a point you make in your article, that it all boils down to the Communist Party seeking legitimacy. Domestically and abroad. Now, you mentioned already the Hong Kong national security law issue that has created a lot of concern. Certainly here in Hong Kong, we've seen protests over the weekend. What are your thoughts on that beyond what you've already said? I mean, in the sense that this is an indication clearly that China wants to possibly use the coronavirus context, but to keep moving on the Hong Kong issue and perhaps try to tamp down the protest movement.
Yes, here in Hong Kong, some protest or demonstration has already restored, last weekend. But I think China, the central government of China, they understand the issue in the context of US-China relations. US-China strategic competition, because we can see from the new security law, one very important point is anti-interference. Of course, a lot of voices, a lot of aspirations in Hong Kong itself, but China, maybe some in terms of some conspiracy theory. This is what the United States trying to do, what to contain, even change China. So of course, now I wouldn't say this is right or wrong, but this is how the Chinese Communist Party thinking, this way. So they have to protect this core interest, because Hong Kong is a core interest for China, and now the United States is trying to do something to contain or change this situation and using Hong Kong or something like that. So I think I understand this way. Hong Kong issue is more than Hong Kong. This is, of course, in terms of freedom, democracy, or international relations in the Asia-Pacific, Hong Kong is quite important and getting much more complicated. But for the Chinese Communist Party, they are thinking this to how to manage the relation with the United States, and this is the biggest implication in terms of how to implement the major power diplomacy, right? The diplomacy as a major power. So this, I would say, this is indispensable phenomenon. Sooner or later, because if China stands up and conducting this diplomacy, I think it would indispensably create some tension with the United States. Sometimes tension between authoritarian systems and democracies. So now the things is getting more complicated.
Interesting. Now, let me ask a bit of a personal question. So, Yoshi, you've been doing research on China for some time, and what are you working on right now? What are your particular focus, in terms of your research?
Yeah, I'm working on one paper and one book, and both are related with China's political development, with China democratized. And and in the context of today's conversation, one important part is external pressure. now some external pressure, for example, from the United States or international communities or democracies, they are pushing China to be more open and more liberalized or internationalized and friendly or something like that. But the problem is, how would this pressure or approach change or facilitate China with something new or something like that? But now, in this sense, I am a bit pessimistic because the external pressure push China more, how to say, inward, more, strong, and created more tension between China and the rest of the world. So, how China democratize or China's political development, this has, very much, affected our life. This is, modern China. This is modern politics. But, for us and the rest of the world, how to understand China, how to deal with China, I think this has been very much a fundamental and consequential issue in this century. So hopefully, I can produce something meaningful.
Now, as a researcher, you speak and read Putonghua, Chinese. You have a long experience working on the mainland. What are the biggest challenges of a China scholar that you see? That you think?
Of course, understand correctly. This is the most important, right? If you don't understand correctly, how to respond, how to deal with that, it's very problematic. But I have never met President Xi Jinping, so I do not understand what he is really thinking about. But under the current circumstance, Xi Jinping has consolidated his power. So for me or for some other China watchers, the most important thing is correctly understand what Xi Jinping is thinking about and is trying to do. So in my word, the real intention of the Communist Party, because Xi Jinping is a son of the party, not Xi Jinping's party, but Xi Jinping is a son of Chinese Communist Party and he's a president. So I'm trying to understand him as possible. Yeah.
Not an easy job.
Yes, not easy.
Anyway, thank you very much, Yoshi, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.